One step forward, watch out, two step back. One step forward, watch out, two step back. Twist the line out of all recognition. Understand this, who have to make a decision. Mashing up the system with a pair of flexible earring. Fling this blasted sinting away from my audio addiction. The truth lies somewhere between a lie and a fiction. There's no use blaming the haze we are chased after, because all is fair and equal between servant and master.
You know it's there, but you can't name it.
It's entirely unconstitutional.
Yes, we are responsible for this country to be involved in a war without the consent of the Dáil. That is entirely unconstitutional, and that's a fact. Yeah. And so what we're doing here is no less bad. In fact, it's right. We have to go in there.
That's so patronising. You know, treat us like the citizens we are. Don't tell us go off and have your protest.
I'm sure it seemed like a hallucination to some of those who saw it first and understood what was happening. A craven mercenary state, oblivious to its citizens, happy to be bought and sold, giving transit behind the backs of its citizens to American troops in desert camouflage. The same troops as were passing across our TV screens as the US bombed Afghanistan in revenge for September the 11th. I wasn't there. I got this footage much later from a friend. Protesters were thin on the ground back then. Military use of the airport was not a subject of discussion in Ireland at the time. Most people didn't know about it, weren't conscious of it, and anyway it was the good war, the war that the world accepted. These Irish protesters were just an anachronism, an opportunity for a tourist photograph for those young troops, a source of amusement for the airport staff. 6 years later, and Iran is in the sights of the rogue empire, and it sometimes seems to me at least that the only route out of the meat grinder and monetary black hole that Iraq has become for the US may be a flight forward into a generalised war. I read Bernhardt on January the 28th, 2007 at 4:47 AM. America can no more back down from conquering the Middle East than give up their American way of life, their seat atop the human pile. This madness of our nation will continue to burn until it burns out. No amount of discussion will derail it. The world is being taken step by step into a total war by America.
Hey, we're not making it worse. You're the ones who are helping those guys get to fucking Afghanistan. It's peace you want. Oh, jeez, you don't get it, do you? Are they making peace out there? Yeah, this is Ireland. Why are the Americans fucking landing here? Why? They are not. Why are the Americans landing here?
It's not Saddam Hussein, it's not the military who are dying. It's the very old and the very weak. US military don't need to be here. They can refuel in England, they're merely pissing out their territory, and getting Ireland complicit in this genocide.
Warplanes going to war of any country, under a military code going to war, are not allowed to land on a civilian airport.
I've come here because I'm objecting to the US military use of Shannon Airport, a civilian airport. It's forbidden under Articles 28 and 29 of the Constitution. Yeah. It's unknown to most of the people using the airport that it's been used by the military. They're unaware of the danger that they're being presented in, because US military use of this airport makes this airport a terrorist target, and this airport does not have the facilities, the security for that type of threat. I know that myself from being out here at night, observing these planes coming in, having it denied then by Irene that the planes were here.
This morning, Prime Minister Sharon of Israel is urging Bush to bomb Iraq very soon and not in the future. And I just want to say that this could be the last opportunity that we have to protest here. I appeal particularly to the Garda force that are here to think seriously about what you're protecting. We are here because we want to dismantle the facilities here. Anybody who's not speaking out about an unjust war like that is actually colluding. Our government has not got the political will to stand up to the likes of America and Sharon. I urge you, please do your utmost to start dismantling non-violently places like Shannon.
The sanctions regime is also supported, of course, it's enforced by the warplanes which have been flying through here over the past decade and before then. This airport has always been contaminated by the military. This is nothing new, only now, well, we all know it, so what are we going to do about it? What are our guardians of the peace going to do about it?
When I was growing up, the Vietnam War was on. I grew up behind the second largest military barracks in Australia, and during that period, they wanted our young men to go and kill and die for them. And it was a big political issue if you were growing up and hitting that age. All they want out of you, post-Vietnam, is your silence and sedation. You know, because they wage war in two ways. One is in the way of Hiroshima, high-tech overkill with their cruise missiles, with their nuclear technology and the delivery systems, or their B-52s dropping from 30,000 feet, or they subcontract the killing out to third world boys and kids, you know. So body bags don't come home. The Filipinos do the killing, the Colombians, the Indonesians, etc. So we really have to, it's a real spiritual struggle to snap out of that apathy and that distraction, and it's important to come to places like this that look so normal. And today, now I saw a US Hercules being refueled at this airport, and you can treat that as business as usual or normal, or you can treat that as a complicit act in the ongoing war against the poor. What's at the end of those runways and the end of those planes is a lot of dead kids. Okay, they're the ones who die, you know.
We are already hearing rumours that the US is prepared to use weapons of mass destruction against Iraq probably next March. Whether they do or not, the wars that are being propagated at the moment by the US, that even in the name of all US citizens, are likely to be totally counterproductive. We need peace now. We need to actively work for peace. It's very easy to start a war. It's much more difficult to start a peace movement. So,
Ed was to get the most numerous peace movement the world had ever seen. It was to be a mixed blessing. It would bloom with a giddy optimism in the months before the invasion, but only its embers would remain by the time invasion had turned to occupation. As the slaughter intensified in the years that followed, it seemed to disappear altogether.
Who's in charge? I mean, there must be someone in charge.
There must be somebody in charge.
Who is in charge? We'd like to speak to whoever's currently in charge of the Gardaí who are here present.
There are 52 visible guards here at the moment.
And no one in charge?
There are more behind the cars, and there are more in the cars, and more behind. We represent the state. We're not going to upset the institutions of the state. We know you're doing your job.
Excuse me, Gardaí, could we please have whoever's in charge? We're going to stay here if it's midnight tonight. We want to speak to the Garda who is in charge. Where is it?
Tom Kennedy, I believe. Inspector Tom Kennedy.
Could we have Inspector Tom Kennedy, please?
These images excited me at the time, but they feel like a game with no stakes in retrospect, like a piece of theatre, even a sitcom. Was there already a kind of unspoken understanding that nothing was really going to happen? An understanding that this was how it worked?
You reason to believe the members of Dáil Éireann are going to storm an airport of the state?
Are you in charge?
That the politicians would play out their allocated roles for what they were worth. That this whole thing was not worth the risk of serious dissent. That, whatever about the protestations and the chances for positioning, it was, at the end of the day, happening somewhere else. And you don't fight about things that are happening somewhere else.
I'd like to know, first of all, why members of the public who want to go in, like a 6-year-old child to use the toilet, or an elderly man cannot go in and use the toilet in the airport. Why is that? I mean, they are no security risk.
The anxiousness of the Green Party to push themselves to the front coincided with the arrival of the media at the airport for the first time. They hogged the cameras and hammed up their roles, addressing a government that wasn't there to listen. Their edge of mockery, so enjoyable at the time, should have been a clue. It was that kind of mockery which is so often the handmaiden of political stasis in Ireland.
I want to go inside the airport. And as an elected representative, I have a right to go inside that airport. There's no justification for keeping elected representatives out. If myself and Mr. Gogarty want to go in as elected representatives, what is the justification for keeping us out? Are the elected representatives in this country now a threat? A security threat? But why not let a TD or an MEP
Is this a directive from the Minister for Foreign Affairs or from the Taoiseach?
$20 bills slapped over them.
This was the day and the event that really alerted the country to the fact that it was facilitating the build-up to a war. Political grandstanding and civil disobedience seemed to be working hand in hand and adding up to more than the sum of their parts. The game was on. For a while our time accelerated, matching the rhythms of the TV news. The world was captivated by endless tales of terrorists, great men, evil men, weapons of mass destruction, oil, big lies. Protest followed upon protest. History wasn't just happening somewhere else, it was travelling through the airport. At some basic level, I think that part of the truth about September the 11th and the period which followed it is that it appealed at some profound level to the egotism of a generation. The world is changing before my eyes. I can see it changing before my eyes. If I can see it changing, I can do something about it. An angry generation had ploughed up the sky, blown up history, blown up our thoughts. History seemed to call out to us, telling us that the decks had been cleared, the processes of history had been restarted, and that the future was up for grabs. It felt good for a while, being in Shannon, feeling that history unfold. There was a kind of euphoria in thinking that the procession of images on our screens could be derailed by images of a different future.
The Irish government is committing treason against the Irish people.
It was strange to observe a community suddenly emerging inside the perimeter of Shannon Airport, under the watchful eye of the state.
What do you think about the US troops staying in the Dromoland Castle and Clare, County Clare Hotel? Do you not think that that's making it a target? And they put that information on the internet. 300 soldiers were 2 Saturdays ago staying here for 24 hours. Does that not make this area a target? You're not allowed to express an opinion.
We're gonna protest and play. We're gonna save some Iraqi case today.
That euphoria had grown after Owen Dubsky jumped the fences at Shannon to daub a US plane with anti-war slogans. A community by that stage was mobilising and arriving at the airport from all over the country without support from political parties and without the prompting of the SWP, a Trotskyist group who had, without protest from the Green or Labour parties, already installed themselves as the de facto leadership of the anti-war movement under the catch-all title The Irish Anti-War Movement. The invocation of the Berrigans by the newly emerged Irish Catholic workers served to heighten the sense of anticipation. There was a real sense that a struggle was about to be joined and that anything could happen.
You're not going to stop the war by refusing permission to land in Shannon.
I think it would be a very big blow to the US, though. It would be huge damage to Bush and the other warmongers' confidence if one country, even a small country like Ireland, if there was such opposition in Ireland that our government had to refuse them permission to land in Shannon.
John Gormley is there, there's people from Sinn Féin, there's the Labour Party, or reporter getting on board. So it really feels like we can actually do something here and then after that do loads of other things, because there's loads of issues, people involved in all sorts of, from environmental campaigns, anti-arms campaign, anti-war, and it feels like a revolution is happening here actually.
Well, it was the women of Ireland on Nollaignaman who set up the first women's No to War camp, and I'm glad that the men have supported us and we have what we have today.
The peace camp, initiated by some veterans of Greenham Common, had served to make the airport the focal point of a rapid national mobilisation in opposition to a US attack on Iraq. Numbers grew, but despite the rigidity of the way in which anger was being harnessed by the self-appointed leadership, the openness and diversity and mutual tolerance that had marked the opening up of the airport as a point of leverage was still there at the edges of the event. Disobedience was still being preached, and information that would give it legitimacy was still being gathered.
Taking my picture.
I'm taking your picture because you were here taking pictures of the protesters and we were just wondering why. You're obviously an American. Can you tell me why you're over here?
I'd like to see your credentials.
You'd like to see my credentials? What kind of credentials are they? So what kind of authority do you have to ask me my credentials?
I just want to go in and speak to somebody in charge and say, I protest the presence of American military planes in this airport.
Under what authority are you asking me for my credentials?
Sorry?
Under what authority are you asking me for my credentials?
Well, you have a press thing on.
Yeah?
Doesn't look like it's press. Just me, okay. Why don't you flip it over and let me see it?
Why should I?
I don't know.
You don't know? And under what authority? And who are you exactly?
Protest. Just go ahead and protest.
And who are you exactly? I'm not protesting, I'm here as a journalist.
Planes that are going to go and kill my relatives as they have done. They dropped 25 million ounces of depleted uranium in Iraq. That's just over an ounce for every Iraqi citizen. That's a hell of a lot of depleted uranium. The results are terrible, the results of what's happening. These are my people. I just want to go in there and peacefully and politely say, I protest. That is all I want to do.
Are you an Irish citizen? Are you working for the Irish government? Excuse me, are you working for the Irish government? Do you have any jurisdiction here? Excuse me, officer. Does this guy have any jurisdiction to ask me for identification? This gentleman standing next to me here, this American gentleman, does he have any jurisdiction to ask me for identification in Shannon? I'm sorry, you are Garda? Okay, and can you tell me who this gentleman behind you is who's asking me for my identification?
There are two clear breaches of law taking place. The Defence Act of 1954 is explicit. Nobody can come enter our land in Ireland wearing a foreign uniform without permission of the minister. The other for which there is no escape is the 1952 order about overflying. And again, nothing can be carried without getting permission from the minister. Well, isn't it extraordinary that they haven't had the courage to say, what is it that Bertie Ahern agreed to when he met George Bush? What agreement did he make? There is no connection between preparing for a war, a strike against Iraq, and any international campaign against terrorism. It is not a choice between Saddam and anything else. It is a choice for morality. It is a choice of peace against war, of putting diplomacy in place, of trying to say to the Iraqi people, create their capacity to make their own choices in Iraq by not starving them and not abusing them as we have through the sanctions. For all these reasons, I am happy, as the spokesperson of my party, the Labour Party, to join with other parties and other organisations and to promise them generous cooperation, because we are all marching to the same purpose. On February the 15th, the people of the world will say, if you won't say no to war, we will, and you'll listen. Thank you very much.
This airport has lost any status as a civilian institution. The railway lines that led to the town of Auschwitz were built for civilian use like this airport was. But they were demonised and changed and became a pit stop on the assembly of death, and that is what Shannon Airport is today.
We're talking about between 10 and 20,000 troops basically through in the week from the 9th to the 19th, or well, the week, but the 10-day period.
So that means Shannon really represents kind of an important logistical component to the build-up
Yes, it does actually. It does, and it's something that the media, either through ignorance or policy, depending on the paper or the outlet, has not been pushing, because they seem to, maybe they're scared of the libel or scared of the government, but they push very small issues like whether they're carrying personal arms or stuff, rather than wait a minute, they've been in a single week you can have more US troops through Shannon Airport than if we were to send every man and woman from the Irish Defence Forces.
Peace activist Mary Kelly was taken from Shannon Garda Station to Killaloo Court just after 2 p.m. today and charged with the criminal damage of a US Navy airplane this morning. She was arrested soon after a person was seen swinging an axe against the nose and wheels of the aircraft just after 5 a.m. Up to €500,000 worth of damage was caused, and it may not fly again for days.
Kelly, set her free! Well, there are a number of reasons why we're supporting Mary Kelly in her action. We believe under the Criminal Damage Act of 1991, on the one hand, that she has a legal excuse for what she did. It was the lesser of the evils, just like a fireman or a Garda would break into a building, or any citizen that was on fire, to save a life. We believe that Mary Kelly's actions are comparable with that same type of scenario.
Mary Kelly, we love you. We all want a hatchet too.
The issue of disarmament, open and accountable non-violent disarmament, I think, is at the core of the rhetoric about Iraq and the rhetoric, but also it's totally in line with generally what we believe here in Ireland.
Hold on a second, there are 90,000 people in this country working in subsidiaries of American multinational companies. What do you think they think about what you did?
I've spoken to quite a number of people, and I think this is interesting. Last time I heard the Vincent Brown Tonight show, his radio show, where he broadcast from the Shannon Peace Camp, and the only person who came out supposedly sort of fighting for the workers' rights was the director of the Limerick Chamber of Commerce, a great cheerleader for the workers' rights. Other people who are workers themselves were there advocating the right.
She had been organising something, and she felt very strongly. I mean, there's a good feeling from everybody of, maybe they didn't like exactly how she did it or whatever, but basically it's a good feeling. But my argument towards a lot of people would be that to push the issue. Okay, when we're not talking about just trying to have a nice time on a camp, we're not on holiday, and people might not agree with what she did, but I think the importance of daring to stick her neck out, daring to be disliked by people for maybe, it's not a peace camp anymore. I mean, that's one of the arguments. It's not a peace camp anymore because she's done direct action. We're not here to try and please everybody. We're here to get across a message. And we're talking about millions of people. We're not talking about just Mr. and Mrs. down the road. We're talking about, a war. And if Mary has to stick her neck out and become a bit unpopular, great. We had someone from the newspaper rang today, and they were sort of trying to find out little bits of Mary's background and stuff, and I just refused. I wouldn't talk to them, and they said, well, what would make a woman do something like that? And I said, well, for example, one thing is that she helped to bury 70 dead bodies last year, in Palestine, and she's seen the nitty-gritty.
Certain people would think what she did was heroic. Other people are kind of in shock about the whole thing, in that it's taken it to another level, because there's been plenty of protests. The awareness level the goal to raise awareness has certainly worked. I mean, a lot of people are talking about the oil, not just in Ireland, all over the world. Taking it to the next step to actually dismantle the plane, it will probably take a long time to sink in for people.
We've got the police coming down asking about us here. We were told that the airport was on red alert because of a bomb hoax or something anyway. And the fact that Mary Kelly, a woman of 50, a trained nurse, not a commando, got so far in with a very large implement, went past a sleeping detective on red alert, and did what they're saying is maybe €500,000 damage to a US Navy jet. It shows, because of what they're doing to the people of Afghanistan and Iraq, and that they shouldn't be in Shannon even that the place isn't even secure. If Mary Kelly can do such damage to an aircraft and she's not intending to actually kill anybody And this is, I mean, falling on to the supposed increase in security after Undufty sprayed the plane, you know, it just shows this situation out there is farcical. I mean, unless they somehow consider the Irish citizens to be expendable in the US war of terror, then it's insane, basically, to have that type of situation going on in Shannon.
After Mary's action, it became even more apparent that the peace camp had become a lightning rod for strong anti-government feeling. I camped there sporadically at this time and watched as politicians of all stripes, bar Fianna Fáil and the PDs, flocked around in an attempt to associate themselves publicly with the issue. They seemed very comfortable enjoying some reflected glory from Mary's action. They would all prove far less comfortable with the idea that what she had done might spark off an ongoing series of such actions, rather than remain as an isolated one-off, a unique, containable symbol of a broader dissent. Ed, Tim and others from the area continued doing what they had been doing for months. Many of us involved in the events at Shannon during this period had realised that it had become a legal grey zone through reading their accounts of their regular information gathering trips into the belly of the beast. They had painstakingly documented the passage of the US Army through Shannon and had, unknown to themselves at the time, already logged the passage of a number of CIA planes through the airport.
He'll come down that road.
Now that drama was going mainstream through the microphone of a young national radio reporter.
So are we on a fruitless mission here?
I wonder how free our government minister would feel to go along for such a ride now in 2007.
The Dáil should already have been reconvened because of this, but there is an attitude now that the government really doesn't want to know, and I think that's highlighted in the fact as well that they don't actually want to carry out checks on the planes, and we believe, and I know the peace activists here believe, that these planes are carrying munitions. They have denied this, and yet they won't carry out the checks, and what I've said is that if they've nothing to fear, then of course they shouldn't fear checks being carried out.
The Irish neutrality has been effectively ended by what's happening at the airport at present, and also this, it seems ironical that peace activists are now being prevented even from approaching the airport terminal while warplanes are being allowed in without inspection.
It was an unnerving experience visiting the terminal. By that time I was almost as comfortable outside it as I was in my own back garden. There was a sense though that the entrance was an unspoken threshold. The American who had appeared months earlier, surrounded by cowed Gardaí, demanding credentials, seemed almost to have been blatantly marking out a line at the other side of which national sovereignty dissolved and something new and unfamiliar began.
We're going to walk around the side, see if we can get a few shots of it from the side. So.
John, I'm about to phone the police, ask them to inspect it.
Oh, yeah.
Do you want to talk to them if I get no joy?
Sure, yeah, sure. Well, I don't think you will get much joy.
Good evening, Garda Coleman. It's Tim Horrigan here. Not too bad. Here, listen, I'm calling about a fairly urgent matter. A military aircraft, a Hercules type, has just landed at the airport. I'm just formally requesting that you will come up and inspect it. Give us permission to use that here?
No, I wasn't aware that I needed.
Actually, obviously out that window. Do you want to come down and take a shot? I think we can see it out that window. You won't be taking any shots unless you get permission. What do you do if we don't ask for permission? We're going over there. We are getting video evidence of what you're trying to hide. There's a US...
You're not using a video.
Why? Because you do not want us to record the US Air Force Hercules which landed at this airport.
You want to
only if you... Call the police if you want to remove me.
We can remove you.
A Hercules aircraft with an American flag parked directly in front of me on the apron of Shannon. That's what I'm seeing. And it's Friday the 17th of January 2003, and the time is 11:40.
The airport police are very jittery about this. They don't like people knowing what's going on here. That's the impression I'm getting.
It says what they had for dinner. It says which pubs they stayed in. This information is out there. Does that not put these aircraft at risk? Do you believe everything you read in the papers? Your woman is writing from Kuwait. She's at the base and doing, she's writing for the military. She's effectively writing for Stars and Stripes. I mean, like, oh, there's actually photographs of them at the airport as well, and there's photographs in the cafeteria. I'm no Al Qaeda, right? But if I can just be walking past and spot that plane, they're not invisible. Someone over there who doesn't like what's going on could come here. Now, I've no ill will towards this airport. So what I'm trying to do is at least let people know what's going on so we can stop it, because this is not a military facility and is not suitable for... Hello? Your apology is not good enough. Just stop doing it.
There's a troop carrying flight in on the left.
A flow of unrestrained imperial power was now passing through the terminal. It had become a black site. National law had been warped by that flow of power and replaced by new opaque norms, as much a part of the architecture of unrestrained imperial aggression as any secret prison.
It is inconceivable that whole battalions and brigades of troops passing through the airport would be doing so without such infantry support weapons, especially when they're going to a war situation or not any operational situation. And I'm saying that for the benefit of my own military experience, because that is the way all armies operate, a standard operation procedure. The uniforms they are wearing are desert fatigues, which clearly indicate that they're going to a region such as the Middle East and not just transiting to Europe. They would normally be wearing green uniforms. Well, all I can say is what I've observed over the past 10 days, and it would be my estimation that well in excess of 5,000 troops have passed through Shannon Airport since last Wednesday week. And because there was a significant number of cargo chartered aircraft also accompanying these planes, it's very likely that this was a full brigade at least of infantry troops accompanied by their support weapons.
There's this story about troops going on rotation. It's rubbish. I've yet to see one of the any of them coming back, basically.
Sure, yeah, sure.
Yeah, behind closed. I doubt it, no. But behind closed doors.
I thought we were going to that they were going to kidnap you and then arrest all us there. What was the policeman saying?
The guard wanted to talk to me in private about the request that Tim put through to have the plane searched. And what he said to me was that he had relayed the request to his colleagues in immigration and that they would take the appropriate action. When I asked for clarification then as to if that meant that they were going to search the plane, he said, well, I didn't say that. So I think what he's saying really is that he's passing the buck.
Troops. Where? Up there. You see them there. You're all coming back onto the plane.
Yanks!
Julia, how are you? You're very welcome. Trevor Sargent. All right.
Minister for Defence Michael Smith the other day on radio, one of the things he mentioned, which is very, very interesting, when he said about we have a lot of people in this country who depend on America for their jobs. Now, I think that clearly let the cat out of the bag. We're now beginning to see an insight into why what the government's real motivation is for ignoring both Irish law and our own constitution.
Keep walking. I am not at war with anyone. Keep walking, keep the guards happy. How are you?
The 1st of February was to mark the high point in terms of numbers at a protest at Shannon during this period. There was a religious feeling to the day, like an outdoor mass. Not surprising as it was St. Bridget's Day. Mary and what she had done wasn't spoken about, but loomed over the gathering. A large banner with the traditional cross linked her to Mary of the Gale and to the goddess Bridget, who brings light to the darkness. There was little in the way of the defiance which had marked previous protests. It was replaced by a feeling of resignation, a sense that forgiveness for sins of omission yet to be committed was being sought. The song said it all, an escape from the plane on which bodies would soon be torn asunder to a higher one. In retrospect, the song seems like a disavowal of involvement, a bit of cheap emotion. Peace is something to wish for, to stand beside for a photo opportunity, rather than as something to wage.
As one between the sea and sun, I am not at war with anyone.
I bedded down that night across the fire from a young seminarian. He and others had waging peace in their minds that evening, but I wasn't to realise it until I had travelled home and slept again. By the time I made my way back to the Shannon area, the peace camp would be gone. All that would remain was a court injunction, listing my name alongside those of a host of others who had been involved with the camp.
The 5 people arrested in connection with this morning's incident at Shannon are 22-year-old Damien Moran, currently studying for the priesthood, along with fellow peace activists Kieran O'Reilly, 42, Nuan Dunlop, 31, Karen Fallon, 30, all from 53 Rialto cottages in Dublin, and Deirdre Clancy, aged 32, of Castle Avenue in Clontarf, Dublin. The charges against them follow an incident at Shannon Airport this morning in which further damage was caused to a US naval plane. The plane had been parked at a hangar after damage, estimated to cost over €500,000, was caused to it in another attack last Wednesday morning. Gardaí seized a number of weapons, including lump hammers, an axe brief, cutting pliers and spray paint, when they made the arrest this morning.
We come to Shannon Airport around the Feast of St. Bridget to disarm and disable the war machine. We hope to begin to take up the runway and ground military aircraft. Is that okay? We hope to be joined in this act of disarmament by those who encounter us. Citizens, police and soldiers wielding hammers brought down the Berlin Wall. We hope all will pitch in and take up this runway and ground planes servicing the war machine. We find this easier to envision than the further slaughter of Iraqi children that US, British and Irish governments wish to consider.
The Cabinet has been discussing the security situation at Shannon Airport in the wake of a request by the Garda Commissioner for military support to protect it. The issue is also likely to be raised in the Dáil this afternoon. The Garda request followed 2 security breaches in less than a week by people protesting against the use of the airport by American forces.
Troops are now going in to be there by midday tomorrow, supporting the Gardaí, and they will carry out their duties in a way in which people will feel much more secure, but there'll be no question of a shoot to kill.
These attacks are outrageous. I come from a society which is one of the world's strongest democracies, as is this country. There's every place in a democratic society for the free expression of dissent. That's one of the things that makes democracies wonderful. But this is not about dissent. This is about violent, illegal action.
You didn't ask me about it, man.
Sorry, this show is it. I forgot to refer to the biggest piece of evidence we have here, hammered by the Irish.
So I think now we see that maybe being a bit over-tolerant with peaceful protesters when they're not one bit peaceful, carrying axes and hammers and lump hammers.
120 troops from Limerick are expected to be involved by tomorrow afternoon. But ironically, at that stage, most of the peace camp will have disbanded, saying the recent attacks on the US Navy plane have made the peace camp the focus of attention rather than the whole landing and refuelling issue.
Today, Brian Cowan freely admitted in the presence of Richard Haas, the US envoy, he said he was embarrassed by it. Michael Smith told me he was embarrassed by it. The whole thing is a cock-up.
How did you feel yourself when the camp was coming down?
Mixed emotions, you know. A lot of energy went into it. But you know, I felt we did what we aimed to do, you know.
we brought the public attention to Shannon Airport so that the government or Renta could not ignore us anymore. And that's exactly what they did. You know, and that's exactly what we did for Finish. We brought it out.
Government would have been happy enough to let all these planes come in during the night, glide out without a whisper in the press. Nothing. You know, we've spoiled their day in that regard, and so have they.
Pull out the front door with Tim.
We were in visiting Damien Moran, my nephew, and he's in great form, and he's holding up very well to all the business. He's continuing to organise his future within the prison confines, and we look forward to him coming back out among us again. We're very proud of him. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks,
is that good enough?
Oh, that's great. Thanks. Bye now.
The army have been stuck in an impossible situation, and a shameful one. Here they are being bastardised to protect what is probably the world's most powerful rogue state.
It's ATA, yeah. American Transit. She hasn't seen that one before, huh? That wing. Yes, you have. Have I?
No, I don't remember him. Oh, you did 1948. What is that colour?
Well, that's
American
NAT,
Transit.
American Transit, TriStar. Yeah. Full of US trips.
Are we going against the court injunction?
No, this is a public road. There's this Sikorsky helicopter. What's going on here?
This is just people plane spotting.
Can you see any presence of the Irish Army here?
Yeah, you can see two personnel carriers over there.
Tim, Connor and Ed had their suspicions at the time about what some of the planes were carrying. A long time would pass before it would become apparent that Shannon had, during this period, been one of the main stop-off points in Europe for the CIA's extraordinary rendition programme. Dermot Ahern and other members of the government responded by proving sets of theorems in an Irish wonderland. We didn't look for them. We were told they weren't there, so we didn't look for them. We didn't search the planes. We won't search the planes. Searching them would be a hostile act. We haven't found them. We didn't look for them. They weren't there. We won't look for them. They aren't there. It must have happened somewhere else. It must be happening somewhere else.
It's a fairly small plane actually. We know those planes can actually make it the whole way from here to Washington. They've got amazing fuel efficiency.
Wait backdrop and the little bits of brochures your hand has over.
Yeah, they're following us. They looked as if they were going to take a U-turn after they passed us. Yes, now they're following us here.
Oh, here they come. What are we doing? Filming? I would prefer if you weren't. Tough, free country.
Are you kind of used to having been followed by police around this area?
You have to pull over.
Keeping Owen Dubsky out of County Clare, which I think is a bit extreme, won't stop the campaign, because people like me and others are going to continue to go up there and monitor what's going on at the airport and tell people. And even if they try to take our cameras, arrest us for alleged spying on illegal activity in our country, we're still going to keep doing it.
I'm not going to pay a fine. I understand that there is a possible jail sentence instead. Well, I'm going to appeal this decision in any case, and we'll see where that lands, where that leads us to, but I'm not going to pay a fine. I've done nothing wrong.
A loose alliance of left libertarians publicly announced that an attempt to tear down the fence that had been torn down months earlier was planned for March the 1st.
What the law actually says is that you're allowed cause property damage if by doing so you're protecting people or you're saving lives. It's up for the court to decide if a defence, and a defence would be that we're helping to stop a war in which tens of thousands are going to die. It would be up to the courts to decide whether or not that's valid.
It was an attempt to bridge the gap between passive protest and the kind of action taken by Mary Kelly and the Catholic Worker Group. All of the more mainstream political groups who had been involved in the Shannon protests distanced themselves from this openly organised attempt at civil disobedience. Elements of the Irish anti-war movement warned that the army might shoot at protesters breaching the fence. It was the one time in the run-up to war when an act of mass civil disobedience seemed possible, but it was the sense of a united movement rather than the fence which ended up being torn down on the day. The event harked back to the first steps of the dance at Shannon, attempting to recreate the image of a reclamation of sovereignty for a bigger battery of cameras. Half of the protesters, led by the Irish anti-war movement, travelled to the terminal to petition the powers that be, as the other half flirted with confrontation and backed down. It's difficult looking back to be critical of those who proposed openly tearing down the fence, but in retrospect, confusion between confrontation and civil disobedience seems apparent to me in the chosen form of the action.
I think we should put George W. into the ring for 15 rounds with Sam.
The media have tried to whip up violence by talking about it incessantly all the time. I mean, the sort of thing that attracts people who do just want to scrap, right? It didn't work, it hasn't happened. People here are very calm, they're very non-confrontational, they know why they're here, and they're going to come back here.
Why blame the media?
Because it's the media's fault.
It's the height of hypocrisy that the Irish government is able to stand up and criticise Britain for filling the Irish Sea full of nuclear waste at Sellafield, and then throwing the airports of Ireland open to war criminals who are wading through it with depleted uranium and probably nuclear bombs, because there's nobody from the Irish state checking the content of this cargo, nor even who's been going through, nor where it's destined to, nor for whom it's intended to murder. And it's the pinnacle of hypocrisy what this state is doing. And it's a shame and a scandal that the Garda Síochána are protecting the spineless politicians and the lickspit lackeys in the government in this country from the law of the land, which is the exact contrary of your duty. And I would remind you of your duty and of the Constitution and of the law.
Are you fucking American? You look like a fucking American to me. You know, with your fucking dog, you know, full of shit, bullshit, asses, fascist pig.
We don't want your bloody war.
Fucking this. Shame to yourself, you should be.
Right, we're talking about a fence here. In 2 weeks' time, a war is going to start in which tens of thousands of people will die. I don't understand why people are worrying about the fence.
Have you ever seen someone calmly tear down a fence?
It was to be the last step of the dance at Shannon before the war. A few brave souls did try to bridge the contradiction between the form and intended outcome of the action with a thin piece of rope, but it was never going to happen twice.
I think the government are kind of seeing how the mood goes before they either hit us with very heavy charges or they decide to minimise it. I guess I would have preferred last Saturday a kind of a very simple action people could do, like blockade the airport. People could turn up as individuals and join a very simple scenario. It's bringing everyone into that kind of heavy confrontation where you're somewhere and you want to get somewhere and there's a lot of cops in between you. It's a lot more problematic than taking a road where you already are, you know. So, but I think hopefully people can consider those arguments and reflections and try again, you know. And you know, they spent €1 million on policing like 200 people the other day. So, you know, it could have been said 2 months ago that Ireland was profiting from this war. It can't be said that now, you know.
At this hour, American and coalition forces are in the early stages of military operations to disarm Iraq, to free its people, and to defend the world from grave danger.
The government of this country is in absolute and utter defiance of the people of the country and the law of the land and international law. You are a band of renegades and outlaws. You should either obey and fulfill the law of this land and international law, or take yourselves off this island and go back to serving your foreign masters in their imperialist bases in Washington or Britain, and do whatever services you feel you have to render to them there. But take yourselves off this island, because you have no business on it if you're not going to conform to the will of the people and the law as it stands. That's my message to this government.
once the decision is made today, that's that, isn't it?
No, I think people are very angry about this, and I think we will see people continuing to come out on the streets to show their anger and to protest at government policies.
There doesn't seem to be any crack in the governing party here, even though it would identify itself as being part of the independence struggle for Ireland, you know. And they're selling that independence out so quickly to the United States.
President Bush's only conversation with me about these matters was to thank Ireland for her effort in the formulation of 1441. There was no give us Shannon or there'll be shamrocks shoved back up your arsehole spiel from Bush. The end.
I think there are some parties who are taking the action they're taking for political expediency. I certainly wonder if Fine Gael were in government, would they take the same line that they're taking today. But I'm pleased that pretty much everybody in opposition is following the line that Shannon should not be used for allowing the refueling of the American war.
As the war began, the loose group of people who had made up the peace camp gathered together for the last time at the gates of the Dáil. A government which a few short months previously had been denying and minimising Irish participation in the war was forced to publicly vote for the use of the airport by a belligerent power, forced to go on the record and to brazen it out in the face of a largely hostile population.
The so-called representative of the people can come up here and face the people!
How am I going to get my drive? So go Thank you very much. Criminal complaint? I didn't expect to be abused, I can tell you that much. I only came out to hear the views, you know what I mean? Well, I'm not too impressed, by the way, at this type of approach, because I came out just to hear the views. My nephew is actually out on the front with the American forces. He's from New York. I think United States America has been enormously good friends of this country, and we feel appropriate. Well, no, we have to support the United States of America in this case. We're not withdrawing. We're not withdrawing. My nephew is out in the front.
Are lying about our Constitution, Mr. Layden.
There's 40 million Irish Americans, so I think that they're approaching this.
What we did on the 3rd of December was a very human thing. It was disarmament. It's a 3,000-year-old prophecy to beat swords into plowshares. It was loving our...
It felt like a historic event, but the only ones really taking part in a historic event were those who had decided long ago that they'd turn their backs, close their eyes, twist words, sell an inevitability, not search the plains, twist the idea of neutrality till it was nothing but a damp rag on the floor. I wonder sometimes what they think about when they hear Shannon or the war mentioned, how they might feel about the likelihood that bodies who have fallen outside of the protection of any law may have been passing through Shannon on the road to God knows where.
I would urge everyone who's standing around to just sit down in solidarity with these people. Sit down and show some solidarity here today. Would any TD or representative in this Parliament who can muster any remnant of their spine put it together now and get out here and sit down with these people who are interested in peace and justice in this land in the face of your oppression and criminal energy? The Gardaí here present, have agreed among themselves or received orders to allow this protest to continue for half an hour and then move in and start to disrupt it. You have no need nor obligation except in service of your political masters to do such a thing. We will not be restricted and controlled like children in a nursery school. We are adults, we are free, proud citizens of a sovereign nation, and neither this government, nor the past one, nor the next one, nor any imperialist is going to take that from us. The Gardaí are going to attempt to attack the demonstration. Will people come please and defend and consolidate?
The way in which the protesters attempting a spontaneous blockade were dragged en masse from the road in the aftermath of the vote showed the face of a state unwilling to allow a space for civil disobedience to open up. No mass arrests, just brute force. It would become apparent over the following months and years, particularly in Mayo, where a community was using similar tactics to oppose the imposition of an unwanted gas refinery on their community, that Fianna Fáil governments feared and avoided mass arrests, and the trials, solidarity and organisation that they might call forth.
You do not have to accept the logic of the aggressor and the criminal conspiracy at the head of this government, which is making the Irish people complicit in the war crime of aggression as and from today.
An angry rejection of the war flowed through crowd after crowd in the following weeks. The Irish anti-war movement encouraged and led this mass purging of emotion. Kieran Allen, one of the key figures in that organisation, would call for mass civil disobedience in the immediate aftermath of the Dáil vote and the onset of war. But his call was undefined and amorphous. What action? When? By whom? The answer would come soon enough in the form of a cynical simulation, but not soon enough to offer the crowds who had appeared suddenly a meaningful and timely way of directing and using the waves of feeling that flowed through them.
And I want to say this because I know it annoys them. They were actually voting for a war, an unjust war, an illegal war, an immoral war. But they pushed those buttons and they must take responsibility for their actions. What we saw last night was an obscenity. We saw cruise missiles raining down on Baghdad. One cruise missile cost $500,000. And we think of the Iraqi children that have no medicine because of the sanctions. What could they have done with the money? How could they have used that? That is the obscenity of war. That's the imbalance that we have in this world. That's the degradation of our values. And what we're saying here today is we are standing up for civilization, we're standing up for principles, we're standing up for a different type of world.
Call meetings in your colleges and workplaces, and look at government offices, at US businesses, and take peaceful, direct action. The only thing you can do when the government won't listen is mass, peaceful, civil disobedience. Go for it!
Huge crowds were led through a binging on and purging of emotion. Here they hurled their anger at the facade of an empty building. Perhaps that's all they wanted.
Here's a message, prepare to your head.
2 weeks into the war, the SWP-led Irish anti-war movement finally called for a specific form of civil disobedience. They had rejected the attempt to pull down the airport fence and march the first as dangerous. They planned a blockade of the Dáil. On the night, only the front gate was blockaded, and the event became a convincing simulation of heightened social conflict. This was our war, a kind of cold war, a war with the outline of a war without the usual contents of a war, without bodies, without blood, without victims, stakes. Again, there was a no arrest policy. The diverse crowd of mostly politically active individuals and groups, and the bussed-in riot police in their fresh-out-of-the-packet costumes, locked themselves together and reached a stalemate. When the riot police withdrew exhausted and the protesters in turn dispersed, a street littered with trodden-on placards and posters, and a multitude of images of what looked like, but hadn't been, a public insurrection, were all that would remain. I'm sure I wasn't the only one hoping at the time for an event to emerge that would throw us into a different future, or at least into some kind of conflict that went beyond the throwing of the shapes of a conflict. Hoping for something that felt real, that old cliché. Something that might put the clock back to zero, free us from a nation led by a suffocated generation of crooks and jugglers. I'm also sure I wasn't the only one who had been unnerved days earlier by the troops in combat uniform, guns in hand, deployed in the narrow spaces to the sides of the Taoiseach's office as the crowd poured out their anger in the direction of the building. It was a threat and a promise. Dead citizens might be the cost of any real attempt to interfere with the passage of the Empire's legions. It was hardly spoken about, but I think it explains what the untended back gate meant. No appetite for a real conflict with the state. Another failed Irish uprising. An end to a generalised public demand for a different government policy. Our war was over before it began.
There is one picture above all that represents the horror of what is going on. Did you see the picture of Karim Sharman in the village of Hilla, standing over the broken bodies of his babies and his relatives, following the cluster bombing of that town by the United States Air Force? Did you see the inconsolable grief and bewilderment on the face of that poor man, mirroring the grief and the absolute horror on the faces of men and women for the past 2 weeks as they have seen their loved ones torn and shredded by what was thrown on them by the great alleged democracies of the West.
As the TV war wound down, so did the protests. We went back to the airport and found that it had been militarised. We protested in a specially constructed pen, observed by police in riot gear. This was to be the last time a protest would be tolerated inside the perimeter of the airport. It felt as if it was all over. But on our way home we heard that the Emperor was to pay a surprise visit to Belfast. He would keep things going for a few more days.
No, 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 no. Well, if Jesus Christ was alive today, there ain't no fucking way he's back to USA. According to the Patriot Act, the Messiah be a terrorist and needs to be attacked. And when people killing people and it's in God's name, humanity is losing in the devil's game. No, no, hey, hey, don't wanna follow no USA. No, 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 no. We got a crooked leader and it's got to go. Well, hey, Mr. Bush, this cut's for you. We ain't gonna do what you want us to. Ain't gonna do what you want us to. Ain't gonna do what you want us to. We ain't gonna do what you want us to, because I got a brother of creed. Getting burned for freedom, getting bombed for liberty, yeah. But I check my family tree, but I ain't got no Uncle Sam in my family. No, 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 no.
Where else in Europe could George Bush come and present himself as a man who is involved in peacemaking other than here? He comes to us steeped in blood from head to foot to talk of peace. How dare he? How dare he insult the people of Ireland in this way? Over this past few weeks and months, marching around Derry, marching around Belfast, I'm sure even in big demonstrations, the people have sometimes had a feeling of futility. What can we really do about it? Well, we can do something about it as part of the 100 million strong mobilisation of people across the world. But more than that, I say to my neighbour Mitchell, to my old friend Alex, and to all the other people here, members, particularly of Sinn Féin and the SDLP here, not in terms of personal assault upon any of them, not in terms of a seeking to politically embarrass anybody, but I ask them, even at this late stage, to think about it tonight. As Eamonn Mitchell and Alex and Barbara, and Alistair and other people who are here, I say to you, think about it tonight. Think if the word went out from this place tomorrow to George Bush and to the world, the democratic leaders here in the north of Ireland had said in simple, clear terms to George Bush, we will not bend the knee to you.
Freedom is spreading south to north. And so the only thing I can tell you is that grip I used to describe that Saddam had around the throats of the Iraqi people are loosening. I can't tell you if all 10 fingers are off the throat, but finger by finger is coming off.
I'm very pleased that the High Court accepted my submission that international law requires neutral states, and that includes Ireland, which follows a kind of qualified neutrality, to prohibit the transit of large numbers of troops to its territory en route to war. And the judge, even this morning, did emphasise that part of the finding, which was important to us. In light of that, the government cannot suggest that Ireland behaved as a neutral state in the war on Iraq. This finding by the court is more serious and has significant implications. Ireland, having assisted the attacking forces, must accept its share of responsibility for the cluster bombs and missiles dropped on the people of Iraq, killing thousands of innocent people.
If we get back to Ireland, and could you tell us a little bit about what is the importance of the act that you did? I mean, you wouldn't be able to stop the war anyway. So why did you do what you do, although that led you or got you in trouble with the government and with the law?
Because the protests we were doing were having no effect.
I think you should give a round of applause.
The result of this, Mary's first trial, where she and her legal team were allowed some latitude in constructing a defence, was a hung jury. She would later be tried for a second time and denied the right to argue a defence of necessity, the only defence available to her under the Criminal Damage Act. She was found guilty of criminal damage and received a suspended sentence. By the time the Fianna Fáil Ardèche rolled around that October, Iraq had slipped down the news. The soldiers of destiny had survived the turmoil created by the way in which they had bowed to the empire. They had got away with burying Irish aspirations to military neutrality once and for all. They richly deserved the mockery the protesters heaped on them for projecting themselves as pro-peace at home while facilitating a war of aggression abroad.
I've been on private property before, sir, and there wasn't a Garda officer came to tell me that. I know I'm on private property. I only want to speak to the Taoiseach and Taoiseach of Ireland. Where is he? Delegates, please pass on a message to your glorious leader. Tell him to come on out here and speak with me if fear no favour. Come out and represent yourself now to the public and the people of this country without the benefit of a prostituted and NATO-compliant press to filter your words for you, sir. You know, sir, that it's a crime in the Republic of Ireland to conspire to cause an explosion. Is that correct? Or have I been misled by my lawyer? Sir, I want to report a crime which is now ongoing at Shannon Airport. It is the conspiracy to cause an explosion using cruise missiles, Tomahawk missiles, depleted uranium cannon shell, napalm bombs. This is a conspiracy to cause an explosion, officer. And this conspiracy has been orchestrated by the leaders of Fianna Fáil and the Progressive Democrats. The main instigator of this crime is inside this hotel today, sir, and his name is Gertrude Ahern. Where is he? Mr. Willie O'Dea. Could I have a word with you, sir? This is the press. Mr. O'Dea, speak to this microphone, sir, with neither fear nor favour, and represent the policies of your party, sir. Mr. O'Dea, I'm asking for an interview for the press. Mr. O'Dea, you can't be in that much of a hurry, sir. Step up here, sir, and do your duty and speak to the press. Are you ashamed of yourself, Mr. O'Dea?
Mockery, though, isn't enough, it seems to me. The new empire and its vassals offer us various facades for public mockery as part of the deal. The whole world hates Bush and nothing changes. We mock Fianna Fáil and nothing changes.
Mr. Linehan, do you see the way the Garda officers are trying to impede my progress to come over to talk to you, sir? Can I ask you, has Ireland participated in this attack on Iraq?
No.
No, it hasn't. No. What about the judge's ruling in Dublin, sir?
Becky, come out!
and fucking face the people. Excuse my language.
A photocopy of a government document relating to the passage of weapons through Shannon Airport earlier this year. Now, earlier on we had Willie O'Dea, Junior Minister for Justice, telling us before the people at the peace camp exposed a lot that there was nothing secretive or furtive going on at Shannon. If that's so, how come so much of this is blacked out?
We mocked the old world, the old men and their diehards, high on the hog of what might be the last economic boom of their lifetimes, fearful of the future, dragging the generations behind them into something dangerous to be in and even more dangerous to get out of. We mocked them and nothing changes. I often feel that the child of the second superpower which I observed being conceived in 2003 may well turn out to be a dangerous cynicism, content with mockery, a warning signal that as the future darkens, a hardening of interests, a shutting down of concern, is taking place among the people of the rich world.
We are behaving like an imperialist power. We are supporting imperialism. Imperialists who can't even run an empire. What the Americans are doing in Iraq, they couldn't manage to run that P word in a brewery, and yet they are doing awful things, and our government is complicit in this, and I am ashamed to be Irish at this moment.
And he's probably gone, Mr. Cohen! Lads, here's Biff O'Cohen. Cohen! Come out here and answer up for yourself. Biff O'Cohen has just arrived, ladies and gentlemen. Biffo! Biffo! Come over here and answer for your war crimes. Mr. Ahern! Come back! Mr. Biffo Cohen! War criminal! Bloodstained murderer! Murder! Sorry, private property. That's private property, my heart. Biffo! Biffo Cohen! This is private property.
You know exactly what you're doing. You're just stopping even the posters from you
can do that.
This is a security zone.
No, it's not, officer. How is it marked as a security zone? It's a public road and public property. Cars are driving up and down it, sir.
Excuse me. Public cars drive up.
Here, don't worry about this. Come on.
With you. I'm not arguing with you now. Actually, I'm telling you now to go. And if you're refusing to go, then that's a different issue.
Take your hand out of your pocket, guys. Look serious.
Mind the grass, lad. What's the gas?
You've been directed to leave the vicinity. Okay?
Vicinity of what?
The vicinity of the security period. Okay?
This is unlawful! This is the rape of free speech! What is this country coming to?
Shannon slipped down the list of priorities for the left in Ireland as time passed by. When the left libertarians and the Trotskyites, who had installed themselves at the helm of the Irish anti-war movement, finally agreed to attempt some kind of coordinated direct action at the airport, numbers and interest had waned, and the attempt at a blockade was a washout. It turned out to be little more than an opportunity for various displays of radical credentials and tactics. The story was stumbling to an end.
Are making cups of tea.
Just a tiny handful of anti-war demonstrators have gathered here.
On the evening Bush landed in Clare, a company in the employ of the Department of Foreign Affairs stripped all coverage of our protests from the RTE generated pool feed before making it available to the networks in the United States. The one cameraman that was dispatched when producers realised the pictures were missing turned up late and got, never mind the bollocks, here's Emperor Bush's opposition in Friendly at All Costs Ireland. The Emperor was coming to town, and the administration were making ready to receive. Air Force One descending in triumph, protected from Irish civilians by the tanks of the Irish Army.
My job is to do my job, you know. I'm going to do it the way I think is necessary. I'm going to set a vision, I will lead, and we'll just let the chips fall where they may.
Right, if you won't let us through, then bring that war criminal out here. Let him smell them bananas. Hey! Come on, pull him up here. Let him smell them bananas and he'll jump in there and get them himself. We'll just drop the cage on him. Come on, pull him out. You'll recognize him with his hairy knuckles dragging on the ground and the shameful skull on his face. Little chimpanzee and his blue baboon's arse. Pull him out here.
So this was the epilogue. The Emperor came to Shannon. He brought the TV cameras and they in turn brought us. We brought a cage for a torturer. We surrounded some of the Irish tanks sent to scare the broader population away from Shannon. The Gardaí were confronted by representations of those who may have disappeared through their politicised inactivity. Powerful images, but they were peculiarly weightless. Not just because the administration here had purged the pool feed, but because they didn't move anything. They weren't enough. They were predictable. They were too late. As much for our own pleasure as anything else. A way to wrap up the story on a high note before filing it away and moving on to another. I spent some of the summer of 2006 waiting around for an ending for my story about the war. The ploughshares who had smashed up a US military plane in February 2003 were by then on trial for the third time. Bombs were raining down on Lebanon, and all the sound and fury from the anti-war constituency from 3 years previously seemed centuries away. I couldn't convince myself anymore that any of it had made much of a difference. The sense that something was rotten about the way the government had facilitated the US at Shannon was all pervasive. So was the sense that there would be no accounting for what had happened there. I remember explaining to Kieran during the trial that in a way I couldn't help but feel sometimes that the millions that had marched in opposition to the war in Iraq in the weeks before the shock and awe bombing of Baghdad had got exactly what they had wanted and then disappeared. The papers in the run-up to February the 15th seemed for once to be happy to help with the plans. Happy to help everyone blow off some steam. Then back to their cheerleading. Part of a generation showed itself on the street everywhere and then went straight back to work, never to reappear. What they had wanted, I surmised, was to create a beautiful, uncomplicated, pleasurable image of themselves as the good ones, the moral ones, the caring ones, the innocent ones. They wanted an image which would either change the world or let them off the hook. An image which would, once and for all, absolve them of further responsibility for a darkening future. An image to wash their hands with. Were we any different? Not in my name was the slogan I remember most from the time. Looking back, it sounds for all the world like a get-out clause. It came out of millions of mouths, an each-way bet. I heard it come out of my own mouth, and it did make me feel good at the time. It seemed enough. But how does it compare to, for instance, over my dead body, or, if you want to get to them, you'll have to come through us? In retrospect, it feels like an abdication of responsibility. Our names were surplus to requirements.
We respond to the call of the prophets of modern America, Catholic worker founder Dorothy Day, who encouraged us to fill the jails with non-violent resistance to war. Martin Luther King, who warns us that we are confronted by a choice between non-violence and non-existence. Father Daniel Bergen, who observes, we have assumed the name of peacemakers, but we have been, by and large, unwilling to pay any significant price. And because we want peace with half a heart and half a life, and will the war, of course, and will the war, of course, continues, because the waging of war by its nature is total, but the waging of peace by our cowardice is partial. Now, is that your statement?
That's correct, yeah.
Our society grits its teeth and lets the troops come through, 1 million of them since 2003. It's okay though, because in our heart of hearts, we, men of property included, hated him, hated Bush. Sure, didn't Mary smash up a plane on our behalf? That's enough to cover us, to be sure, to be sure. No blowback will come our way. If we stop them, it'll be a hostile act. That translates as, the value of your property will drop. That's what the administration says. Nothing is easier to destroy than the private morality of a people who value little more than the preservation of their own private lives. We looked into the abyss for a few weeks on our TVs over the shoulders of the heroic conquerors. We mistook the barrage of live TV and its bodiless war for the progress of history unfolding, as if it somehow stopped when we stopped watching. The state waited for us to forget. The state waited for us to lapse back into passivity, waited for us to start treating the facilitation of war with the same resignation as we treat the weather, waited for self-interest to sneak up on and conquer disgust, for compassion to blow away on the wind, to disappear. The state knows that those who want, who bombard with demands, without a willingness to sacrifice anything meaningful, can always be outweighted. We ship it out, routine brutality, ordinary slaughter, to somewhere else, over the horizon, screened off, just passing through, nothing to do with us, unseen, forgotten. The airport reappears in brief flashes. The banshees on their list of the dead, Ed and the flowers, Connor and the Guantanamo prisoner. They tried to call it up again. They're trying to call it up again. To make it reappear. To make us reappear. To wind back or restart the sequence of events and make it lead to somewhere different.
One more. Hey, thank you. There you go. Oh, beautiful. Can you get a picture?
The decision of this jury should be a message to London, Washington DC and the Dáil that Ireland wants no part in waging war on the people of Iraq. Refueling of US warplanes at Shannon Airport should cease immediately.
Neutrality should be kept, it should be held. It's something that's really precious and it shouldn't be gotten rid of. They're making moves to get rid of the Irish neutrality. The Irish people are saying no. What we did was right, and what other people feel need to do will be right too.
All life is sacred. Every life, without exception, has something sacred in it. That means every life of every person in Iraq is as sacred as every life of every person in the United States and in Ireland.
I want to call on all sectors of civil society in Ireland, especially the trade unions, to provide resources for their workers who want to dissent, who want to stop the complicity in war making in Ireland, to stop the refueling of the planes, to stop patting them on the back as they go out to wage war in Iraq. And this is, as Deirdre said, the conscience of the Irish community has spoken, and we call on the Irish government to seize this illegal activity, because what our act was 3.5 years ago was legal.
One step forward, watch out, 2 step back. 1 step forward, watch out, 2 step back. Twist the line out of all recognition. Understand this, who have to make a decision. Mashing up the system with a pair of flexible earring. Fling this blasted sin away from my audio addiction. The truth lies somewhere between a lie and a fiction. There's no use blaming the haze we are chased after. between servant and master. Strange old things seem to remain the same, when all the while we are trying to make change. Watch how the mutants, them a fight and a struggle, pushing up themselves to find space in the middle. To be seen is what it all seems to mean, when big things are going on no surprise. How it bleeds you dry of the things you have in your
For the last 2 years, the position on Shannon, for instance, would have been rock solid. Where is that now?
But we went in and tried to get every single thing we could in Shannon. We got a change so that the rendition flights in Shannon will be checked.
But that was never what this was about.
That was a big importance to us.
It was important, but it was not what it was about.
Against international law.
You spoke about an illegal war.
I say to the spirit of the culture, strange old things seem to remain the same, when all the while we are trying to make change. Twist the line out of our recognition. Understand this, who wants to make a decision? One step forward, watch out, 2 step back. 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 One step forward, watch out, 2 step back.
I remember Eamonn Ryan saying to me that the one concession that you got from the government to go into government with Fianna Fáil was that there would be intermittent searches of planes in Shannon Airport. And I'm just wondering why, more than 4 months later, not a singular plane has been searched.
The programme for government doesn't actually mention search specifically. It mentions about compliance with United Nations laws.
Strange old things seem to remain the same, when all the while we are trying to make change. Watch how the mutants, them a fight and a struggle, pushing up themselves to find space in the middle. To be seen is what it all seems to mean, when big things are going on no surprise. How it bleeds you dry of the things you have in your eye. Me as a man who won't tell anybody what to do, but there's an abstract black hole laughing after you, creating biological patterns more mystical than sun. If the mind looks sharp, you ask what this thing happen. To rupture a structure, but make this thing corrupt here. Testament I say to the spirit of the culture. Strange old things seem to remain the same, when all the while we are trying to make change.